The Undertaker just dropped the most shocking announcement in WWE history, and I guarantee you're not going to believe what he said about Stephanie McMahon. This isn't just another wrestling story, this is about to destroy everything you thought you knew about the McMahon family legacy and why the dead man himself is putting his reputation on the line for someone who literally fired him on live television. You think you know the real story behind Stephanie McMahon's departure from WWE? Think again. What The Undertaker revealed will make your blood boil when you realize how the wrestling world has been lying to us this entire time. And when you hear what Stephanie's real role was behind the scenes, you'll understand why even Triple H couldn't protect her from the backstage politics that nearly destroyed the company from within. Mark my words, by the end of this video, you'll either be furious at WWE's corporate machine or you'll finally understand why The Undertaker considers Stephanie McMahon one of the most underrated figures in wrestling history. But first, let me ask you this, do you think Stephanie deserves to be in the Hall of Fame alongside legends like Stone Cold and The Rock? Drop your honest answer in the comments because this debate is about to get heated. The wrestling community is already divided on this announcement, with legends calling it either long overdue or completely undeserved. But here's what nobody's talking about, The Undertaker didn't just announce this randomly. He specifically chose now to make this statement, and the timing couldn't be more controversial given everything that's happened with the McMahon family scandals. Let me paint you the real picture of what happened behind closed doors. When Stephanie McMahon suddenly resigned from her executive role in January 2023, the official story was about wanting to spend time with family and pursue other interests. But industry insiders know that's corporate speak for, there's way more to this story than we're being told. The Undertaker's announcement comes at a time when the McMahon name has been dragged through controversy after controversy. Yet here stands the dead man, arguably the most respected figure in professional wrestling, putting his legendary status on the line to defend someone whom many fans blame for WWE's corporate sanitization and the departure of beloved wrestlers. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is something that's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about Stephanie's time in WWE. The Undertaker revealed in his announcement that Stephanie was actually the driving force behind some of the most beloved storylines and character developments that fans credit to other people entirely. Remember when WWE finally started treating women's wrestling seriously? When the Divas division became the women's division and we got legitimate main event matches? The conventional wisdom is that Triple H pushed for these changes through NXT. But according to The Undertaker, it was Stephanie who fought tooth and nail in boardroom meetings, often going against Vince's wishes, to elevate women's wrestling to the level we see today. Think about this for a second, and tell me in the comments if you remember this differently, but when did you first notice WWE's women's division becoming something you actually looked forward to watching instead of a bathroom break? Was it gradual, or did it seem like someone behind the scenes was systematically changing how women were presented and promoted? The Undertaker claims that Stephanie was the architect of this transformation, working behind the scenes for years before anyone gave her credit. He says she compiled statistics, created presentations, and basically built an ironclad business case for why women's wrestling needed to be taken seriously. And when Vince would shoot down her ideas, she'd come back with more data, more evidence, more proof that this wasn't just politically correct thinking but smart business. But here's what's going to really make you angry: if The Undertaker is telling the truth, then Stephanie McMahon was fighting these battles while simultaneously being portrayed as the evil corporate villain on television. She was literally working to improve the very company that was having her character be booed out of buildings every night. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're probably saying, she was born into privilege, she didn't earn anything, she just rode her father's coattails. And look, I get it. That's been the narrative for decades. But The Undertaker's announcement specifically addresses this criticism, and what he reveals is going to shock you. According to the dead man, Stephanie McMahon was actually the first member of the McMahon family to take a voluntary pay cut during WWE's financial struggles in the early 2000s. While other executives were protecting their salaries, she reportedly went to her father and offered to reduce her compensation to help keep lower-level employees on payroll. Here's a question for the comments: how many other wrestling executives do you know who have voluntarily taken pay cuts to protect regular employees? I'll wait while you think of examples, because I bet you can't name any. But it gets even more controversial. The Undertaker revealed that Stephanie was actually against many of the storylines that made fans hate her character the most. The infamous Stephanie McMahon-Helmsley storyline where she married Triple H? Apparently, she fought against it behind the scenes, arguing it would damage both her credibility and Triple H's career trajectory. The angle where she would consistently emasculate WWE superstars on television? The Undertaker claims she repeatedly asked creative to tone down these segments, arguing they were making the entire roster look weak. But Vince wanted heat on the McMahon family name, and Stephanie was willing to sacrifice her own reputation for what she believed was best for business. This brings us to one of the most infuriating aspects of this whole situation. If everything The Undertaker is saying is true, then Stephanie McMahon spent years being the scapegoat for decisions she didn't even support. The fans booed her, the internet wrestling community criticized her, and wrestling podcasters made careers out of bashing her booking decisions, all while she was apparently fighting against those very same decisions behind the scenes. Tell me in the comments, does this change how you view some of those controversial storylines? If Stephanie was actually arguing for better presentation of wrestlers and storylines, but was overruled by Vince, should she still be held responsible for the final product? But here's where The Undertaker's announcement becomes even more shocking. He didn't just praise Stephanie's corporate contributions, he specifically mentioned her contributions to his character and storylines. According to the dead man, it was Stephanie who suggested several key elements of his most memorable feuds, including specific match stipulations and character motivations that fans still talk about today. The Hell in a Cell match with Mankind at King of the Ring 1998, one of the most iconic matches in wrestling history, apparently had input from Stephanie regarding the storytelling aspects and how to make the violence serve the narrative rather than just being violence for violence's sake. She was reportedly concerned about the long-term perception of The Undertaker's character and wanted to ensure that even in his most brutal matches, he remained sympathetic to the audience. The Undertaker also revealed that Stephanie was instrumental in the decision to have him lose his streak at WrestleMania 30. While fans were shocked and many were angry about ending the streak, The Undertaker says Stephanie presented a compelling argument about the importance of creating new legends and how his loss could elevate Brock Lesnar to an unprecedented level of credibility. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what about all the time she buried talent on television? And this is where The Undertaker's announcement becomes most controversial. He claims that many of those segments were actually Stephanie trying to generate heat for the wrestlers involved, not diminish them. The idea was that if she could make the audience genuinely angry at her character, it would create more investment in the wrestlers who eventually overcame her authority figure role. But here's the problem with that logic, and tell me if you agree in the comments, it only works if the wrestlers actually do overcome the authority figure eventually. And in many cases, that payoff never came, leaving wrestlers looking weak and Stephanie looking like an untouchable villain. The Undertaker acknowledged this criticism in his announcement, but he argued that the failure wasn't in Stephanie's vision but in the execution and follow-through by other decision-makers. He specifically mentioned several instances where Stephanie advocated for wrestlers to get their comeuppance against her character, only to have those storylines changed or abandoned by other members of creative. This brings us to perhaps the most explosive part of The Undertaker's announcement. He revealed that Stephanie McMahon was actually blacklisted from certain creative meetings because her ideas were considered too wrestler-friendly by some members of management. Apparently, her consistent advocacy for talent rights, better storylines, and more logical character development made her enemies within WWE's corporate structure. Think about that for a moment. The woman who fans accused of being out of touch with wrestlers and only caring about corporate interests was reportedly excluded from creative decisions because she cared too much about the wrestlers. If that's true, then the entire narrative about Stephanie McMahon has been completely backwards. The Undertaker went even further, claiming that several high-profile wrestler departures from WWE over the years were partially due to Stephanie losing political battles behind the scenes. When she couldn't protect certain wrestlers from what she considered unfair treatment or poor booking decisions, some of them chose to leave rather than deal with a system that wouldn't listen to one of their few advocates in management. Now, before you start thinking this is just The Undertaker being nostalgic or trying to rewrite history, consider this: why would he risk his reputation on this announcement if it wasn't true? The dead man has nothing to gain by defending Stephanie McMahon. If anything, it could hurt his standing with fans who have strong negative feelings about her tenure in WWE. The timing of this Hall of Fame announcement is also significant. With WWE under new ownership and management, The Undertaker might feel it's finally safe to tell the truth about what really happened behind the scenes. He no longer has to worry about corporate politics or protecting business relationships that might have kept him quiet before. But here's what's really going to make you angry, and I want you to think about this carefully before you comment. If The Undertaker's version of events is accurate, then Stephanie McMahon was essentially punished twice. First, she was forced to play a character that fans hated, even when she disagreed with the creative direction. Then, she was blamed for corporate decisions that she actually opposed but couldn't prevent due to her position in the company hierarchy. The more you think about it, the more unfair it becomes. Stephanie was in a unique position where she had enough authority to be blamed for everything wrong with WWE, but not enough power to actually fix the problems she identified. She was simultaneously overexposed on television and underrepresented in the actual decision-making process. The Undertaker's announcement also addressed one of the most common criticisms of Stephanie, that she never got her comeuppance on television like other authority figures. But he revealed that this wasn't due to ego or politics on Stephanie's part. According to the dead man, she actually pitched several different ways for her character to receive punishment or embarrassment, but these ideas were consistently rejected because management wanted to maintain the heat on the McMahon family name. This creates an interesting question for the comments section: if Stephanie was willing to be embarrassed or defeated on television for the good of storylines, but wasn't allowed to be, should she still be criticized for her character's presentation? Can we blame someone for outcomes they actively tried to avoid? The Hall of Fame announcement becomes even more controversial when you consider the current state of WWE. Under Triple H's creative leadership, many of the changes that fans are praising, better storylines, more logical character development, increased focus on wrestling ability, were apparently things that Stephanie had been advocating for years before her departure. It's almost like WWE needed Stephanie to leave before they could implement her ideas, which is both ironic and tragic. The company is now doing many of the things that The Undertaker claims she fought for behind the scenes, but she's not there to see the vindication of her vision. The Undertaker also made a point of mentioning Stephanie's contributions to WWE's expansion into mainstream media and corporate partnerships. While these moves were often criticized by hardcore wrestling fans as selling out, they were crucial to WWE's financial stability and growth. The company's current value and market position can be traced back to many initiatives that Stephanie spearheaded or supported. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this might change your entire perspective on Stephanie's time in WWE. The Undertaker revealed that she was actually the executive who fought hardest to maintain WWE's connection to its wrestling roots, even as the company expanded into other entertainment sectors. She reportedly argued in board meetings that WWE's strength came from its wrestling foundation and that any expansion should enhance rather than replace that core identity. This completely contradicts the narrative that Stephanie wanted to turn WWE into a generic entertainment company that just happened to have wrestling. If The Undertaker is correct, she was actually trying to protect wrestling while others in management wanted to minimize its importance in favor of more mainstream entertainment ventures. The announcement also touched on Stephanie's role in talent development and recruitment. According to The Undertaker, she was instrumental in identifying and signing several wrestlers who became major stars, including some who fans assume were Triple H's discoveries. Her eye for talent and understanding of character development apparently played a huge role in WWE's success during her tenure. Here's a question that's going to really divide the comments section. If Stephanie McMahon was responsible for identifying and developing talent that fans love today, should she get credit for those successes even though she also takes blame for the failures? The controversy doesn't end there. The Undertaker's announcement specifically mentioned that Stephanie's Hall of Fame induction will include video testimonials from wrestlers who worked with her behind the scenes. These testimonials will reportedly reveal stories about her advocacy for talent that have never been made public before. Imagine finding out that wrestlers you thought were treated unfairly by WWE management were actually being protected and supported by Stephanie McMahon in ways that fans never knew about. It would completely recontextualize her entire tenure with the company. The announcement has already created a firestorm on social media, with wrestling fans split between those who think this recognition is long overdue and those who believe it's revisionist history. But The Undertaker's credibility in making this announcement can't be questioned. He's not someone who would risk his legacy on false claims or political maneuvering. What makes this even more compelling is that The Undertaker specifically chose to make this announcement himself rather than letting WWE's corporate communications handle it. This suggests a personal conviction about Stephanie's contributions that goes beyond professional courtesy or business relationships. The timing also coincides with renewed interest in the McMahon family's history with WWE, particularly as fans and media examine the complex legacy of the company's founding family. The Undertaker's announcement forces everyone to reconsider not just Stephanie's role, but how we evaluate the contributions of corporate figures in professional wrestling. For those of you who have been critical of Stephanie McMahon over the years, and be honest about this in the comments, does The Undertaker's announcement make you question any of your previous assumptions? Are you willing to consider that maybe the story was more complicated than it appeared from the outside? The Hall of Fame induction for 2026 is still more than a year away, which gives plenty of time for more details to emerge about Stephanie's contributions to WWE. If The Undertaker's announcement leads to other wrestlers and executives sharing their own stories about working with her, we might get a completely different picture of her time with the company. But here's what I think is really happening, and this is just my opinion, so let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments. I think The Undertaker's announcement is less about Stephanie McMahon specifically and more about the broader issue of how we judge corporate figures in wrestling. We're quick to blame executives for everything wrong with the product, but we don't always consider the complexity of corporate decision-making or the possibility that the people we blame might actually be fighting for the changes we want to see. The wrestling business has always been about perception versus reality, and maybe that extends to the corporate side as well. Maybe some of the people we've criticized over the years were actually trying to fix the problems we complained about, but they were working within systems and power structures that limited their ability to create change. The Undertaker's announcement about Stephanie McMahon's Hall of Fame induction forces us to confront these uncomfortable possibilities. It challenges our assumptions and asks us to consider that maybe, just maybe, the story was more complicated than we thought. So here's my final question for the comments, and I really want your honest opinion on this. If it turns out that Stephanie McMahon was actually fighting for many of the changes that fans wanted to see in WWE, but was prevented from implementing them by other decision-makers, does that change how we should remember her tenure with the company? Should we judge her based on the outcomes that occurred during her time in power, or should we consider the intentions and efforts that The Undertaker claims she made behind the scenes? The debate over this Hall of Fame announcement is just beginning, and it's going to force the entire wrestling community to have some difficult conversations about legacy, perception, and the complex relationship between corporate leadership and creative output in professional wrestling. What do you think? Does Stephanie McMahon deserve this recognition, or is The Undertaker's announcement a step too far in rewriting history?